this is the Provoked Prawn, and this is the Corsair H170i Elite Capellix all-in-one cooler. This is a CPU cooler and Corsair's largest CPU cooler with a 420mm radiator, 340mm RGB fans, and a very nice setup. Now you can see it here in the Corsair 7000D, which I've done a video on separately that I'll link to in the description. Obviously, the focus of this video, though, is to talk to you about the setup process, the various aspects and features of this cooler, how it installs, and what it's like to use. This is an interesting cooler because it's not only massive, but it also has a number of things that are cool to it. For example, the fans are able to run in a 0 RPM mode, which means they won't spin unless required, which means that it can run quietly depending on the overall setup of your machine, and yet delivers excellent cooling performance. Now I'm going to include some benchmarks and talk about performance levels at the end of this video, but for the initial beginning I'm going to show you what you get in the box and talk about the setup of it. Now this is a 420mm cooler. Obviously you require a large case. The 7000D is a full tower case which is capable of holding such a radiator. It is a very large thing indeed, and it does work with a number of different CPUs. So it'll work with both AMD and Intel. It works with AMD AM4, STR4, STRX4, as well as Intel's 1200, 1150, 1151, 1155, 1156, and 2066, 2011 sockets. So there's a load of compatibility here. And for this setup, I am using it with an AMD Ryzen 9 5900X. So it's an AM4 socket, so you get to see the installation of that. Now, I did a video on the previous model, the H170i Elite Capellix, which is 360mm, and I installed that on an Intel bracket. So if you'd like to see how to install this, this is basically the same setup but with a slightly different size, and a overall aesthetic is slightly different, but the installation is basically the same. So if you want to see how to install an Intel, check out that video. But the setup for it is very straightforward. Corsair has also improved their AIOs in recent years, and the installation process is now a lot easier, thanks in part to that Commander core, which is in that blue packet that I just got out there. And I'll talk to you a bit more about that later on, but it basically allows for the installation of all the cables really simply. You also see Intel brackets and the AMD retention brackets and things in there too, and the bags are all nicely labeled, and that's one of the joys of the installation of this thing. You also have different swappable caps for the pump heads so that you can choose between white and black, but because of the design of it you can also custom print your own. So if you have a 3D printer or something like that, you're able to 3D print your own design and have a really nice installation. It's also worth mentioning in the miscellaneous packet that you can see there, you have a number of screws for the installation on this, and they actually provide enough to enable you to do a push-pull setup. So if you want to buy extra ML140 RGB fans, you could theoretically install 6 fans on here for pushing and pulling the air through the radiator. So that's a really nice addition, I think. Simple little things like that make a big difference. Obviously it comes pre-installed with thermal paste. I did actually have a drama with the thermal paste on this one, which I haven't had in the past. Corsair's usually got a good setup here, and I think it was probably a user error on my part, and I'll talk to you a bit more about that later. But you can see it installed there. Now it also comes with Intel's retention bracket as standard installed on there, but it's easy to take off and swap it into the AMD one, which I'll show you later on. And you can see that black pump head cap is the standard setup there. But it can also, again, easily be swapped out, and I'll show you the process for doing that in a minute. Now I'm going to leave all these specifications in the description so you can find out more about this on paper. It's also worth noting that it comes with a 5-year guarantee, so it's pretty decent in terms of the longevity of it. And I've always found Corsair's IIOs to be really good anyway at running a long term. As I said, these are ML120 RGB fans, so obviously large fans with a large radiator should result in a good airflow and keeping things running cool. On an AMD CPU that should be particularly useful because obviously those runs hotter traditionally than Intel, so it's certainly nice to have such a large rad and good performance. These fans will spin from 400 to 2000 RPM But as I mentioned earlier, you also have a 0 RPM mode, so you can set it in IQ software so that they won't spin at all unless they're required. So if it's just idling and you're browsing the web, for example, you'll find that those fans aren't spinning, which obviously reduces the overall noise. Now, one of the biggest highlights of these recent Elite Capellix coolers is this Commander Core, which is basically a control box for your fans that allows you to plug in both the power and the RGB into one device that then just plugs into the SATA power from your PSU and a USB header on your motherboard, and allows you to easily control the RGB lighting. That's a real joy, because basically you required to purchase a Commander Pro, which is a separate control unit historically, and so Corsair's made it a lot easier to install these AIOs now and to control the fan speed and lighting from one device, which means a lot less wires and a lot less hassle. And I'm going to show you a bit more about that as we go through. Here you can see all the different brackets, and as I said, that the labeling on the bags makes things a lot easier. The instructions are very good, but hopefully the setup process and video will show you the installation setup for it. Also, Corsair has a Corsair Labs YouTube channel that's worth checking out, where they basically talk through how to install various products. So it's worth having a look there if you're struggling, but hopefully you'll get enough detail out of my video. Now, one of the other nice things that you'll notice here on this radiator is that they've pre-drilled those holes a lot nicer. These fans are a lot easier to install than historic Corsair AIOs. I've always had problems in the past, but not with these Elite Capellix ones. The recent couple of Elite Capellix AIOs I've tested out actually found the installation is a lot easier. It is now far easier to screw into the holes. Historically, some of the fins on the radiator would be in the way of the screws, which made it really difficult to screw in. Not the case anymore. This was installation was a breeze, getting those fans on there. So the first step of the process for this, for what I'm doing, is I'm going to top mount that radiator. So basically trying to work out where the pump head is going to sit. I figured it was actually best to have the tubes from the AIO on the right hand side so they don't interfere with my exhaust fan on the left. That actually results in a slight problem that you'll see later on I'll talk to you about, but it's still a decent setup, I think, as well. Now, the second step is obviously to work out the orientation of the fans. So here I have them set so that they're facing down into the case. That means that I'm exhausting air through. So those fans are going to pull cold air or slightly warm air out of my case over the radiator and out the top. As you've seen, there's 12 fans installed in 7000D, so there's a lot of cold air being pulled in. Actually, 820mm fans working to pull cold air into the case, and then air's then being exhausted through the rear and through the top. And you'll see there are a multitude of screws included in the box. We're using the long ones to install the fans onto the radiator. And as I mentioned, these are really easy to screw in now. They've made those holes a lot better. There's no fins in the way. So just screwing in those fans, making sure the cables are facing in the right direction. Because we're going to be running the power and the RGB for cables from the front of the case into the rear, and set up the Commander Core so it's in the rear, tucked away nicely, and then able to control all the fans. The other thing that's nice about the Commander Core is that you can install other Corsair fans on it. So historically, when I've used it on previous builds, I've looped it in the case fan. So if you have the same case fans, if you have ML140 RGB fans throughout your case as well, you can then connect them up into the Commander Core, and then you can create lighting sequences across multiple devices, so going across those fans and then onto the radiator fan, and also controlling the RGB lighting on the pump head as well. And I'm going to show some of the RGB lighting and the controls within Corsair's IQ software at the end of this video, so you can see what's possible and what you can do with it and get a nice overview on that. But just to demonstrate again what we're doing with the Commander Core, you essentially have two cables from each fan. You'll see that they are labeled 2 RGB, and that slots in on one side, and then the fan power slots on the other. The best thing to do is to work out the sequence of where your fans are going in the case if you want to create an effect which goes from one fan to the next to the next to the next. then you need to make sure the sequence of fans is plugged in correctly in order to achieve that. So it's worth bearing that in mind when plugging all your fans in. With just these three, it's fairly easy. Now you have an Allen key tool included in the box that allows you to remove the cap on the pump head. So if you don't want the black one that's pre-installed, you can swap it out with the white one. As I said, you also have the option to get some custom printed ones, so you can personalize the look and feel of it, which is pretty nice. This pump head also has 33 RGBs installed in it, Capellix RGB LED, so you get some nice RGB effects. There's like an inner area and then an outer area on it, so there's some really nice visuals, and I'll show you that a bit later on as well, a bit close up. You saw some of it at the beginning of the video, you will see some more later. That obviously goes along with the 8 LEDs per fan on the ML140s on this setup as well. So you've got loads of RGB lighting in here, all controllable within iCUE, and you can set it up so it runs when your PC's on, and also you can set it in hardware mode, so you can set different RGB lighting effects depending on what you're doing, whether iCUE is running or not. So you'll see that the removal of the pump cap and the reinstallation is dead simple. Now what I'm doing with this is I'm installing it in the top of the 7000D airflow, which luckily has a very nice bracket that you can take off, a fan bracket for installation purposes. And obviously you need to make sure that you have enough room in your case for it, because it is a gargantuan beast, being 420mm rad. It is quite large, but that does mean it's got a good surface area to keep that liquid inside cool. I have been asked in the past whether these things actually come with liquid in them or whether you need to fill them up. They're all in one coolers. They already have liquid self-contained within it, so they're a lot easier to install, and you don't have to worry about filling them or anything like that. You'll see that they have little screws that are included with washers, using those to mount it onto the fan bracket and mounting that on top. Now, as I said, there are longer screws included, so if the case can handle it, you could do push-pull. So for example, I could mount some ML140 RGB fans on top as well and use the longer screws again to run into the top of it, and then pull air through from the case and pull it across the top as well, so you're doubling up the fanage, and then they can all be plugged into the commander core. That's not essential, but if you want to do it for even more fan goodness, then you can. And the setup is really easy because you basically have the control box and all the screws necessary to do it. You just need the additional purchase. And once that's finished, then obviously mounting the radiator inside. And then you'll start to see one of the problems that I've had with my setup, and why it's worth thinking about how you're going to install this, because in this case it's pretty joyful because you have a lot of space. I obviously had the option to mount the radiator one way or the other. As I said, I wanted the pump to be on the right hand side rather than left, because I thought it was going to interfere with the rear fan at the back when those tubes were there, and I wanted that to not be the case and also to still look good. But one of the problems I had is that when it's mounted in this position, the tubes aren't quite long enough. They do stretch to where the CPU is, which is obviously what you want. But what I found is that it presents a problem in a different way. I'll talk to you about that. I'll show you what I mean in a minute. A close up again of the commander core now. You've obviously got to find somewhere at the back of your case where you can install this, where it's in a good reach for those cables that are running through. The setup of the cooler itself is dead simple, because essentially there's two cables that come out of it, and I'll show you this in a second. One plugs into the commander core and the other one into your motherboard, and then you just have the cables from the fans, and then from the commander core you essentially need to plug it into SATA power. SATA power is a flat cable that comes out of your power supply unit, and that plugs into this. That then gives it the power, and then the USB connection allows you to find it in iCUE software and then have access to be able to control the fan speed and obviously the RGB lighting as well. So really simple setup. Again, just quickly showing you how you'd install the fans and the logic for that. So plugging them in on either side, but it's important to make sure obviously that you have the length, the cable length, because the rad's installed at the top. If I put the control box right at the bottom of the case, you might have trouble stretching down, but you do have the stickers on the back of it, so it makes it fairly easy to install. Reasonably straightforward setup. shouldn't be too much of a hassle. I've already installed the motherboard on here, and now I'm going to go and install the pump head. As I said, it's pre-installed with thermal paste, so you don't need to worry about thermal paste as long as you don't make a mistake while installing it. Because I'm using an AM4 bracket on this AMD CPU, I'm removing the Intel standard brackets and replacing them with the AM4 ones. You can see that they easily just slip out and then push back in, and it's basically a case of making sure they're the right way around, so they point up in this way. And I did find the setup to be quite fiddly on this, I'll be honest, with the AMD setup. So it's a bit more fiddly than Intel, but it's still fairly straightforward. You basically have these little hooks that then you screw some thumb screws on top of, and those hooks then hook over the AMD retention bracket, which is pre-installed on the motherboard. There's a couple of basic notches above and below the CPU that those hook over. My advice, if you're doing this process, is to make sure that these hooks that I'm currently screwing in are quite loose, so you have a good bit of length, so you're able to stretch over and hook over those things and then tighten it up when the pump head is down on top of the CPU. And that way you make sure it's easy and far less fiddly. Hopefully you've got a large case, because I found this was a really fiddly part of the installation process, trying to make sure that those things hook over the CPU. And one of the issues you'll see here is I actually had a problem with it, and you'll note that some of the thermal paste has come off onto the CPU, but it hasn't spread properly, and because I was having such a struggle trying to fit it. So I actually found initially when I ran the CPU through Cinebench and did some tests on it, that it was running too hot. It was running at 90 degrees centigrade, and so I had to take this off and reapply some other thermal paste from Arctic Cooling, and then it ran a lot cooler and down to 70 degrees instead. And I'm going to leave all the benchmarks in the description so you can see more. So once you've installed it, you have these two cables coming out the pump head. The little tiny one on the left plugs into the CPU fan header on your motherboard, which is usually on the top right. Be sure to check out the motherboard manual to find out more about where that is. And then the other cable runs into the back and plugs into the commander core, so that allows you to control the pump head and also monitor the temperatures and everything else. So you can see that fat cable now has run to the back, and then it just plugs into the commander core. It's really simple, straightforward, because there's actually markings on the thing that tell you make sure you got it the right way up. There's a little grey bit of paint on the cable that plugs in, so you can't plug it in the wrong way around. So it's really simple to do that. So that's plugged in now, and the pump head itself is also plugged into the motherboard. And then now I can show you what I was talking about with the problem. So you can see the pump tubes are long enough to reach the motherboard in this setup, but one of the dramas I've got is that it's in a position where it's not quite long enough to put below the RAM. So I have this RGB RAM installed, and I can't actually put it below there, so it's actually blocking the view, which is sad. Now with the commander core, you need to make sure you have SATA power plugged in, and that will ensure that everything's running as it should be, including the fans and the control of it. So SATA power comes from your PSU, and then you use these flat plugs to plug in your power. Fairly straightforward. So you can see the setup is really easy on this thing, very simple setup, and then you're away. Go back to the front of your case and find the USB header. You find the USB cable that comes out of the commander core that needs to be plugged into the header there. Again, you'll find this in your motherboard manual, but usually it's in the bottom, roughly in the middle or on the right hand side, clearly marked with USB connections. We're putting a USB control in there that allows your motherboard and Windows to detect what you've got plugged in. And then you have the end result, and here you can see the case in all its glory. 8 intake fans on the front, and then RGB lighting and wonder coming out of the CPU cooler as well. And obviously, because it's all Corsair fans, you can get that to match up within IQ software and run some really nice sequences of lighting effects. Things get a bit more complicated with this many fans, and I covered this a lot more in the 7000D airflow video if you're interested in finding out what you do to make sure all the fans connect up and have a good sequence to them. But as you can see, you get a really nice end result out of it. This is the standard effects that are running when you turn it on, so defaults to a rainbow, but you can see some of the colors. You also see the zonage of the lighting, so some really good lighting to it. There doesn't seem to be any horrible hot spots or anything. It looks the part. And then a close-up view of it. Now, Obviously with this number of fans it does run quite loud, and you have the option to switch between various different modes within Corsair's IQ software to adjust the fan speed, obviously to keep things running cool, or to go quiet, because there is a quiet mode and a balanced mode, and obviously performance when you want things running fast and ensuring that it's running nice and cool. The fact that you have that 0 RPM mode is definitely one of the highlights for me. If you have this sheer number of fans in there, but if you set it to 0 RPM mode and then fans just don't even spin unless they're required, that obviously keeps the whole thing running quietly, which is a pleasure during the day when you're working or just not gaming. And it certainly leaves a nice glow on the desk. So once I had it set up, I wanted to test out and make sure it was all running properly, and I'd recommend doing this. So I used Cinebench, PC Mark. Cinebench is free, and Heaven Benchmark, and a number of other things with 3D Mark as well. But the Cinebench was a good test because that's quite CPU intensive, and what I found was it was running at 90 degrees centigrade on the first pass, which is far too hot. So thermal paste reapplied to the pump head, then reseated it, and then I found that I was getting around 70 degrees under load. I'll leave all the benchmarks and results that I got in the description so you can see it, but the performance was really good, the scores were really good, and it was running at a good temperature, and that was just in balance mode. I hadn't set the fans to extreme or anything like that. I wanted to see how it would do under a normal sort of circumstances. Obviously, if you find that you're running a bit too hot or you want to get more performance, you can crank those fans up. I think it's important to demonstrate that it wasn't too obnoxious. And actually in the background, if I'm quiet for a minute, you can just hear the birds. You can't really hear the fan noise. So I think that demonstrates that it isn't obnoxious despite that huge number of fans in the case. That it still does a good job of both keeping the thing cool but not doing it in such a noisy way. But you can also see within Corsair's IQ software that you get a view of not only the load the processor is under. So if you look in the bottom left, you'll see it was 100% load, 76 degrees C. It was minimum 71, maximum 77 at that point we're running. And you also see the fan speed on the AIO and through the Commander Pro, which is the other fans in the case. So you can see it's not like ramping up to the maximum speed because they go up to 2000, but certainly still keeping it cool under pressure. Now what I wanted to do is demonstrate some of the RGB lighting that you can get. So obviously you've seen rainbow, and now we have it set in a number of different colors. We're going through into IQ and basically changing the settings in there. So within the IQ software, you'll find that if everything's gone smoothly, you should see the Elite Capellix set up in there, and then you will notice that you can go into the lighting setup and it'll show you which fan is what by giving you one of the LEDs lit up on a certain color. So you'll see the red, yellow and green, and you can see that in the case as well, so you can reposition them to reorder what it's going to be and what that setup is. But what you'll note also is that each of those dots represents the LED on there that you can then customize for the lighting. So when you go into the lighting effects, you have the option to choose each of those bits, and the pump head as well. So you can see with the pump, you have one dot in the center, then you have a ring around that, and then you have a ring around the outer level. You can choose from various different lighting layers and various different effects within there. You'll see there's presets for all sorts of things like the rainbow, color shift, color pulse. You have static colors, and you can even set, so there's a temperature warning, so you can use the RGB lighting to let you know what your temps are, and if it gets too hot it'll change red and warn you that there's an issue. So there's lots of different things that you can do with this. You can also program the pump separately from the fans, and you can see the quick lighting zone and things like that you can select. Also just demonstrating what you can do here, so you can individually select each of the LEDs on the pump head and change the color of them individually and separately, or change the entire ring and make that one color and then make the center perhaps a different one. Have a variety of different effects in here. So there's loads of different options for customizing the lighting. Obviously, this is all going to happen when IQ's running. You'll note in a minute there's a hardware lighting section where you can go into that, and you can set that so when IQ's not running, those lighting effects will happen. You can also customize each fan separately, so you could have different lighting for different ones. And then within IQ, you also have like an instant lighting profile, so you can set it to a specific color for the entirety of your case and all Corsair peripherals in it, which is something that I like to do. They have different scenes for that, but I like to set all my fans and everything to blue, for example. I just like a nice static single color. I think that can be the most attractive, but you have a variety of options to choose from with both static colors and then overall sort of effects. Or as I said, you could even set it to measure the temperature of your case, which is pretty nuts. There's loads of different options. Here again, I'll just give you a close-up view of the pump head and just the different effects that you can get there, but just to demonstrate the fact that there are different zones on that pump head, so you can customize the RGB lighting there and just get a different personalized view. It's really nice, I think. Now in hardware lighting, which is what I mentioned a minute ago, that basically runs when IQ isn't running, so that's what the RGB effects that you get are. If you go into cooling, you'll see that you can choose between a number of different settings on there. So you have balanced, quiet, extreme, variable speed, and 0 RPM. You can't do 0 RPM on the pump, obviously, but you can set that to quiet. And one of the things I noticed about this pump head is I didn't hear any whine or anything from it, which is a problem that I did find on a previous AIO from Corsair, but that was quite a while ago. I haven't had any issues with the more recent ones. But it does mean that you can obviously have one option or the other. You can basically have an extreme one. You'll note there's a variable speed and you have cooling presets down the bottom left, so you can switch between those and adjust it. Obviously, it's nice to be able to leap in here and set it to extreme if you're doing something that's a bit more taxing. You're playing a CPU intensive game or doing some sort of rendering or something with video, you can obviously have the option to go in here. But I think one of the nicest things is definitely the ability to go into the 0 RPM, keep things running cool. Under the alert section, you can also set emergency shutdown at a certain temperature or to alert you when there's a problem. So if it detects it's getting too hot, this is certainly not something I've had to worry about. It hasn't been a problem with this one. It runs really smoothly and nicely. So there we have it. That has been the Corsair H170i Elite Capellix. A wonderful AIO that's really easy to install, and here you can see a taste of the 0 RPM where it's spinning up and spinning down. And overall, really simple setup and a very nice all-in-one cooler that should do the business for a long time once you've got it set up. And it certainly matches nicely with other Corsair fans in the case, and the result is a wonderful look and feel. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Let me know if you've got any comments or questions. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video, and a big special thanks to my YouTube members, those extra special people that have clicked that join button and send a really appreciated monthly donation to the channel. Those people are Meaty Keyboard, Raw, JShank007, Sir Spawns a Lot, Jeffrey Johnson, Kraken Tortoise, Beaster Bunny, Moist Kebab, and maybe even you. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far in the video, do a big favour and check out my gaming channel, Provoked Prawn Pews, which is a new tiny little channel I've set up just for gaming clips. And if you love the sound of my voice, check out my ASMR channel as well. Thanks for watching.